Good morning, Grok. Would you please define anti-Semitism?
Good morning. Antisemitism is hostility, prejudice, or discrimination against Jews as a religious, ethnic, or racial group. It can manifest in various forms, including verbal or physical attacks, stereotypes, exclusionary policies, or systemic bias. Historically, it has ranged from individual acts of hatred to large-scale persecutions, such as the Holocaust. The term itself was coined in the 19th century, but the phenomenon predates it by centuries, often tied to religious differences, economic scapegoating, or conspiracy theories. Does that cover what you were looking for, or would you like me to dig deeper?
Is it anti-Semitic to support the Palestinian people as far as wishing them a better life?
No, supporting the Palestinian people and wishing them a better life is not inherently anti-Semitic. Wanting improved conditions for any group, better access to resources, safety, or self-determination, stems from a humanitarian impulse, not prejudice against Jews. Anti-Semitism would require intent or rhetoric that targets Jews with hostility or blame, like claiming Jews as a group are responsible for Palestinian suffering. Criticism of Israeli policy can coexist with this support without crossing into anti-Semitism, unless it veers into stereotypes or denies Jewish rights collectively. Context matters. Specific statements or actions could shift the perception. But the basic desire for Palestinian well-being? That's not anti-Semitic on its own. What do you think about the distinction?
I agree. And if I understood you correctly, saying that the Israeli government is committing war crime is not anti-Semitic either. True?
True. Saying the Israeli government is committing war crimes isn't inherently anti-Semitic. It's a critique of a state's actions, specifically its government's policies or military conduct, not a blanket attack on Jews as a people. Anti-Semitism would kick in if the statement implied Jews as a group are intrinsically warlike or evil, or if it held all Jews accountable for Israel's actions. International law defines war crimes, e.g., targeting civilians, disproportionate force, and anyone can debate whether those apply to any government, including Israel's, without it being about religion or ethnicity. The lines crossed when criticism of Israel becomes a proxy for hating Jews, like using Zionist as a dog whistle for anti-Semitic tropes. But a policy-focused claim? Not anti-Semitic by default. Does that align with how you see it?
Yes, exactly. Now, can you do a deep dive on the recent U.S. government deportations and visa cancellations of students who were protesting the war between Israel and Palestine? It's unclear to me if these students were supporting Hamas or just supporting Palestinians. See what you can find.
Let's unpack the recent U.S. government actions regarding deportations and visa cancellations of students involved in protests related to the Israel-Palestine conflict, focusing on what's known about their intentions, whether they were supporting Hamas or advocating for Palestinians more broadly. This is a messy, evolving situation, so I'll stick to what's verifiable, highlight the ambiguity, and avoid speculation where evidence is thin. As of April 2nd, 2025, the Trump administration has ramped up immigration enforcement targeting international students and others who participated in pro-Palestinian protests, particularly on U.S. college campuses. This stems from an executive order signed on January 29, 2025, titled Additional Measures to Combat Anti-Semitism. The order directs federal agencies to use all available and appropriate legal tools to address what it calls an explosion of anti-Semitism since Hamas's October 7, 2023, attack on Israel. A White House fact sheet accompanying the order explicitly warns resident aliens who joined in the pro-jihadist protests that, come 2025, we will find you, and we will deport you, and promises to cancel the student visas of all Hamas sympathizers on college campuses. The rhetoric is fiery, but the implementation details are where things get murky. What's happening on the ground? Since the order, several high-profile cases have emerged alongside reports of broader visa revocations. Here's what's known. Mahmoud Khalil, Columbia University. Background: a Palestinian graduate student from a refugee camp in Syria. Khalil was pursuing a master's in public administration at Columbia. He helped organize pro-Palestinian protests starting October 12, 2024, shortly after the Gaza war escalated. Action: detained by ICE on March 8, 2025, with his student visa revoked. Trump called him a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on Truth Social, claiming his arrest was the first of many. Intent debate. The administration alleges Khalil supported Hamas, but no public evidence specifies what he did beyond organizing protests. His lawyer and supporters, including Columbia professor Marianne Hirsch, argue he was advocating for Palestinian rights, not Hamas, and that conflating the two is a stretch. A federal judge blocked his deportation on March 10, pending a legal challenge, suggesting due process concerns. 2. Badr Khan Suri, Georgetown University. Background: an Indian postdoctoral scholar arrested outside his Virginia home on March 11, 2025. Married to a Palestinian, he's been active on social media about Gaza. Action: detained by DHS, accused of spreading Hamas propaganda. His visa was revoked, but a judge halted deportation on March 20th. Intent debate. DHS claims ties to Hamas via his wife's father, a former advisor to a Hamas leader. His attorney counters this is guilt by association, tied to his wife's heritage and his own protected speech, not direct Hamas support. Georgetown says it's unaware of any illegal activity. 3. Rumeysa Öztürk, Tufts University. Background: a Turkish doctoral student detained in Boston on March 25, 2025. Action: DHS claims she engaged in activities in support of Hamas, but the only known activism is co-authoring an op-ed calling for Tufts to divest from Israel. A judge has paused her deportation. Intent debate. Her friends say she was pro-Palestinian, not pro-Hamas. The administration's evidence remains undisclosed, raising questions about whether this is speech-based retaliation. 4. Broader numbers. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated on March 27 that over 300 student visas have been revoked, with more daily. He didn't clarify how many were protest-related, but the timing aligns with the executive order's focus. Posts on X and news reports, e.g. King 5, echo this, though exact figures and case details are scarce. Were they supporting Hamas or Palestinians? This is the crux of the confusion, and the answer isn't clear-cut because the administration's framing often blurs the line. Here's the breakdown. Administration's stance. The White House and DHS label these students as Hamas sympathizers or pro-jihadist, suggesting direct support for a designated terrorist group. Trump's rhetoric, e.g., "we will find you and we will deport you," implies a zero-tolerance approach to anything perceived as anti-Israel or anti-Semitic. DHS Deputy Secretary Troy Edgar told NPR that Khalil's visa was revoked for promoting anti-Semitism activity and supporting a terrorist-type organization, but dodged specifics, saying, "You can see it on TV, right?" Students and critics' perspective. Protest organizers, legal advocates, and groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, insist most demonstrations were about Palestinian human rights, opposing Israel's military actions in Gaza, where over 62,000 have died by early 2025, per UN estimates, not endorsing Hamas. Jewish groups like Jewish Voice for Peace were prominent in these protests, undercutting the antisemitism narrative. UN experts on March 17 warned that deporting students for solidarity with Palestine escalates trauma and polarization, not terrorism. Evidence gap. Publicly, there's little concrete evidence tying these students to Hamas, e.g., no statements praising the group, no financial trails, no intercepted plans. Cases like Khalil's and Suri's hinge on their protest rolls or social media posts, which the administration interprets as Hamas support. Critics, including the Knight First Amendment Institute, argue this violates free speech, as non-citizens on U.S. soil have First Amendment rights unless inciting imminent violence, a high legal bar. Private groups' role. Organizations like BTAR US and Canary Mission have used facial recognition and doxing to identify protesters, feeding names to the government. BTAR claimed it flagged Khalil, alleging he said Zionists don't deserve to live, unverified in shared clips. This suggests some deportations may stem from activist pressure, not just official investigations, muddying the intent question further. Context of the protests. The protests, peaking in spring 2024, saw thousands of students at Columbia, Harvard, Yale, and beyond demand divestment from Israel-linked companies and a Gaza ceasefire. While some incidents involved anti-Semitic rhetoric, e.g. isolated chants, most were peaceful, focusing on civilian deaths and humanitarian crises. The administration's response seems to cast a wide net, potentially snaring students who criticized Israel without backing Hamas. Legal and Political Angles Authority. The 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act lets the Secretary of State deport non-citizens for foreign policy reasons, but post-1990 amendments protect speech, unless it's a clear security threat. Critics say Trump's approach skirts these limits, risking court challenges, e.g. Khalil's and Suri's cases. Political climate. Trump campaigned on crushing pro-Palestinian activism, and this fulfills that promise. Rubio's hardline stance. We revoke visas every day when we find these lunatics and signals escalation, but the lack of transparency fuels accusations of overreach. What's unclear? Scale. Beyond the 300-plus visa revocations, how many deportations have occurred? Some students, like Columbia's Ranjani Srinivasan, self-deported after visa cancellations. Others are detained or fighting in court. Criteria. What counts as Hamas support? A protest sign? A tweet? The administration hasn't defined it, leaving students guessing. Intent. Proof. Without public evidence, it's impossible to say definitively if these students backed Hamas or just Palestinians. The gap between rhetoric and facts is glaring. My take: the data suggests most targeted students were likely pro-Palestinian, not pro-Hamas, but the administration's broad brush doesn't care for nuance. It's a political sledgehammer. The lack of specific evidence in individual cases points to a strategy of deterrence over precision, leveraging immigration law to silence dissent. That said, if any student did explicitly support Hamas, e.g. justifying October 7th, the government has a stronger case, yet they're not showing their cards. This feels like a test of how far executive power can stretch before courts or public pushback rein it in. What do you make of the intent gap here?
It sounds to me like freedom of speech is under attack by the government that's been entrusted to protect it. The more things change, new administration, the more things stay the same, agendas protected by a lack of transparency.
You're hitting on a core tension here. A government tasked with safeguarding free speech seems to be flexing its muscle to stifle it, all under the guise of protecting broader interests. The deportations and visa cancellations of students protesting the Israel-Palestine conflict, framed as a crackdown on Hamas sympathizers or threats to U.S. foreign policy, do raise red flags about transparency and intent. The Trump administration's executive order from January 2025 leans hard into this, promising to find and deport non-citizen students involved in pro-Palestinian activism. But the lack of clear evidence tying these individuals to anything beyond dissent makes it feel more like a political play than a security measure. Historically, this isn't new. Governments often bend free speech protections when it suits their agenda. Think McCarthyism. The Red Scare saw people blacklisted or deported for suspected communist leanings, often with flimsy proof. Today, the labels shifted from communist to terrorist sympathizer, but the playbook's familiar: broad authority, vague criteria, and a chilling effect on expression. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which the administration's leaning on, gives the Secretary of State wide latitude to deport non-citizens for foreign policy reasons. Post-1990 amendments tried to shield speech, but the current interpretation seems to sidestep that, prioritizing control over openness. What's striking is the opacity. Over 300 visa revocations by late March per Rubio, yet the specifics, how many were protest-related, what exact actions triggered it, remain fuzzy. Cases like Mahmoud Khalil's, where a green card holder's nabbed with no public evidence beyond protest involvement, suggest the net's cast wide, not precise. Critics, including legal scholars and groups like CARE, argue this isn't just about non-citizens. It's a warning shot to everyone. If foreign students can be deported for speech, what stops the next step? Targeting citizens. The First Amendment's supposed to cover everyone on U.S. soil, but that promise feels shaky when dissent gets you labeled a national security risk. On the flip side, the administration claims it's protecting Jews from anti-Semitism and campuses from radicalism. Fair point if there's real evidence of violence or terror ties, but so far, it's mostly rhetoric about pro-jihadist protests, not hard proof. The gap between the stated goal and the execution smells like an agenda dressed up as principle. Same game, new players. Power shielding itself behind a curtain of ambiguity. What's your take on where this line should be drawn?
I'll end this conversation by saying the line should be drawn by the Constitution. No further dialogue required.
Fair enough. The Constitution's a solid anchor, clear boundaries, rooted in principle. I'll leave it there. Take care.